Imagine leaving your house for a quiet weekend, only to come back and find out your HOA president broke into your home, thinking she could snoop around without consequence. What she didn't know was that inside, waiting patiently, was your highly trained K9, loyal, fearless, and ready to defend its territory. What followed was one of the most shocking clashes of arrogance and justice this community had ever seen, and the fallout would change the neighborhood forever. Before we get into this unbelievable story of HOA power abuse, arrogance, and a homeowner's ultimate revenge, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another wild HOA drama. And don't forget to like this video if you love seeing Karens finally face consequences for their actions. The neighborhood had always been tightly controlled by its HOA, but the woman at the center of it all was Martha, a classic Karen who thrived on snooping, lecturing, and enforcing her power wherever she could. Martha had a reputation for barging into people's business, literally and figuratively, but her arrogance had only grown worse over time. She carried herself as if she owned every inch of the community, convinced that her authority extended far beyond what the HOA bylaws allowed. For months, she had fixated on one of her neighbors, a man named David. He had recently moved into the community after retiring from years of law enforcement service, choosing this quiet neighborhood as a peaceful place to settle down. What Martha didn't know was that David's background came with a certain skill set, and more importantly, a companion. His German Shepherd Rex was no ordinary dog. Trained during David's years on the force, Rex was both a loyal companion and a fully capable K9, sharp and fearless, always by his owner's side. Martha, however, saw neither David's quiet confidence nor Rex's disciplined presence as anything to respect. Instead, she viewed David's independence as a challenge to her control. She despised the way he ignored her petty fines, her ridiculous letters, and her constant attempts to pry into his business. To her, David was a problem that needed to be handled. She started small, leaving notes on his door about imaginary violations, grass length, trash bins, even the color of his curtains. But David didn't bite. He stayed calm, steady, and silent. For a woman like Martha, being ignored was the greatest insult. It drove her deeper into obsession. She became convinced that David was hiding something in his home, something that justified her hatred and fueled her need to expose him. And so, when she saw him leave town for the weekend, she saw an opportunity. With her clipboard tucked under her arm and a set of tools she had no business possessing, Martha crept toward David's home one quiet evening. Her plan was simple: sneak inside, poke around, and come out with some fabricated evidence she could use to humiliate him publicly at the next HOA meeting. What she failed to consider was the fact that Rex was still inside. The K9 had been trained to guard, to watch, and to protect. And when Martha forced open the back door and stepped into the dimly lit living room, Rex was already waiting in the shadows. His ears perked, his muscles tense, his gaze locked on the intruder who dared set foot into his master's domain. Martha thought she was about to uncover secrets. What she didn't realize was that she had just stepped into the jaws of justice, and her life would never be the same again. The moment Martha entered David's home, Rex sprang into action. His bark was loud and commanding, echoing through the house with a sound that made even the bravest criminals freeze in their tracks. For Martha, who had never faced anything scarier than an unhappy neighbor, the sound was enough to nearly send her heart through her chest. She stumbled backward, clutching her clipboard as if it would protect her, but Rex was already advancing. His training was evident in every move. He didn't attack recklessly. He circled her, positioning himself between Martha and any possible escape. His teeth flashed in the dim light, his growl low and menacing, daring her to make the wrong move. Martha's bravado vanished in an instant. All the smugness, the arrogance, the certainty of her superiority melted away in the presence of a creature she couldn't control. She tried to command him as if he were some neighborhood pet, raising her voice with shaky confidence, but Rex only growled louder. He wasn't her dog. He wasn't anyone's but David's, and he wasn't about to let her leave. Hours seemed to pass as Martha stood trapped in the living room, too terrified to move. Every time she shifted her weight or glanced toward the door, Rex's growl deepened, reminding her of exactly where she stood. She thought about calling for help, but how could she explain what she was doing there? Even if she managed to make it out alive, the embarrassment would be unbearable. As the night dragged on, Martha grew more desperate. She tried to inch toward a chair, hoping to sit, but Rex lunged just enough to snap his jaws inches from her leg, sending her collapsing to the floor in fear. Sweat poured down her face as she realized she wasn't in charge anymore. She was at the mercy of the very man she had sought to destroy, though he wasn't even there. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Martha was still cornered. Rex hadn't let her rest, hadn't let her slip away, hadn't given her a moment of peace. Her once perfect hair was a tangled mess, her clothes wrinkled and stained with sweat. She looked less like the proud president of the HOA and more like a criminal caught in the act, which, of course, she was. And that was exactly the sight David came home to. When he walked through the front door, suitcase in hand, he found Martha frozen in place, wide-eyed and trembling, while Rex stood tall, ears alert, gaze steady, as if waiting for his master's command. David didn't need words to understand what had happened. His years of experience told him everything: the broken door, the intruder, the loyal canine standing guard. Martha had overstepped in the worst way possible, and now she was going to pay. The fallout was swift and devastating for Martha. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened, though no one had the full story at first. Some said she had been caught red-handed rifling through David's things. Others whispered that she had spent the entire night cowering under Rex's watchful eye until David returned. The truth, as humiliating as it was, soon came out in full detail when David reported the break-in to the authorities. The police arrived, took statements, and documented everything. Martha's attempt to spin the story, to claim she had been inspecting his home for HOA compliance, only made matters worse. Not only had she broken into a private residence, but she had been held at bay by a trained canine until the rightful homeowner returned. It was the kind of story that made headlines, and it didn't take long for local reporters to pick it up. Photos of Martha being escorted out of the neighborhood in handcuffs spread like wildfire online. Neighbors who had once feared her power now laughed behind closed doors. The woman who had bullied them for years was finally exposed as the fraud she was. The HOA board, desperate to salvage its reputation, voted unanimously to remove her from her position. But the damage was already done. Martha's arrogance had led her into a trap of her own making, and her downfall was complete. Meanwhile, David's quiet strength and Rex's loyalty earned them a new kind of respect. Neighbors who had once avoided conflict with the HOA now saw David as a protector, someone who had stood against corruption and won, not with words, but with patience and the steady presence of his K9. For David, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Martha had crossed a line, and Rex had simply done what he was trained to do: protect his home, his master, and the peace they both deserved. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without Martha's constant interference, people breathed easier. Barbecues returned to backyards, kids played in the streets without fear of fines, and the once quiet community came alive again. And every time neighbors passed by David's home, they gave Rex a nod of respect, or, when they were brave enough, a friendly pat on the head. Martha, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale. Her name was whispered only as a reminder of what arrogance and entitlement could lead to. She had thought she could control everything and everyone. Instead, she ended up controlled by the one force she could never tame: justice, embodied in the form of a loyal K9. And that's how one arrogant HOA president's break-in backfired in the most spectacular way possible. If you enjoyed this story and love seeing Karens finally get what they deserve, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more insane HOA drama, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another tale of arrogance meeting its downfall.